everybody out in Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. It's your Congressman Jamie Raskin, and I am convening today another critical resource webinar for my constituents in the 8th District and our friends across Maryland and even from across the country, if they want to tune in, to relay critical information at a time of great uncertainty and fluidity for our immigrant communities and their families and their friends. So I'm going to introduce our very distinguished panelists in a moment, but I wanted to first say a few words about the webinar. This week marks the first week since 2021, in the middle of COVID-19, that my office has not honored a local hero of Maryland's 8th Congressional District. We began that in the middle of the pandemic in order to honor first doctors and nurses and first responders, and it's since expanded to include people in lots of different domains of life. And we all love it, and we prioritize it, and gives us a lot of uplift every week to focus on the people who make the 8th District such a wonderful place to live and work and raise a family. But we're not going to do it this week. We are convening instead this webinar on immigration and what's taking place in the immigrant communities in Montgomery County. So the times have found us here, as Tom Paine said, and we're not going to run away from our duty to explain to people what's going on. We're going to introduce you to a lot of people who are working on the front lines of this crisis today to help people understand what's going on and to help people manage the various problems and crises that are going on in the country. So, as your elected representative in Congress, I've sworn an oath, as you know, not to a party, not to a king, not to an autocrat or a billionaire oligarch. I've sworn my oath to the Constitution of the United States, and my office is always here for my constituents, whether it is federal workers who are trying to figure out their futures and their rights and their benefits and their work under attack, whether it's people at NOAA or FDA or NIH or any other federal agency, whether it's people who are just concerned about what's taken place with the Department of Treasury and the seizure of the financial payments process, or it's immigrants in our community who are very concerned about the level of rhetoric and the various policy offensives against different groups within the immigrant population. So we have a terrific panel of experts joining us today. And I'm going to introduce them all, and then I will turn it over to them, each to talk for 5 or 6 minutes about what's happening in their particular field of work. Our first panelist is Naureen Shah, who joins us as the Deputy Director of Government Affairs in the Equality Division at the ACLU. She's a human rights lawyer, and she's going to provide an overview of the recent presidential executive orders and how they affect the immigrant community. Next, we'll hear from Abel Nunez, who is he will be well known to those of you who join me on Fridays because he's a former Maryland D8 local hero and executive director of CARECEN, which is a key institution in the community for accessing social and legal services. And he will present a brief overview of the rights that immigrants have in interactions with ICE. Next will be Elba Garcia, who works for MCPS. She is the Montgomery County Public Schools Senior Community Advisor, and she will talk about student rights at school and talk about the safety and security of all kids at school and the environment at school. And I'm also grateful that Luisa Fernanda Cardona, the director of Montgomery County's MidCounty Regional Office, will be here to close us out by discussing county resources that are available to people in our community. So thank you all for joining us. This is the second in a series we're having. The first one was about the rights of federal workers at this moment. And this one's on immigration and immigrants, and I pass it over now to Naureen Shah.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We so deeply appreciate you putting this together and inviting the ACLU to participate. I'm Naureen Shah, and I'm one of our federal immigration lobbyists and policy analysts at the ACLU. I'm also a Rockville resident, and I'm coming to you today with this presentation very briefly on President Trump's executive action. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and you can see we'll go through a few of these. Okay. So from the first day when President Trump was sworn in, he attempted to flood the zone with anti-immigrant actions, using executive orders, and then swiftly putting into place agency actions and requests to Congress for funding, and putting in motion immigration bills. All of this calculated to enlarge the Trump administration's authority to conduct deportations, its capacity to conduct deportations, and above all, to intimidate government actors into going along with all of it. So what do these deportation actions, these immigration actions look like? Let's see if I can to move. Well, it was really quite sweeping. We saw across a host of different issue areas, more than 10 executive orders that were issued on the first day. And in the weeks since then, executive orders ranging from, and actions ranging from attacks on immigrant legal service providers to attacks on the prerogative of state and local governments to not participate in immigration enforcement, an expansion of immigration detention, even to Guantanamo Bay, expansion of where immigration enforcement would happen in the United States. And that last part is what I want to spend most of my time talking with you about today. But I would be remiss if I didn't also point out that the Trump administration is not going unchallenged in all of this immigration work that it's trying to set in motion. The ACLU and other organizations have filed lawsuits on many of the Trump administration's immigration executive actions, including its attempt to end birthright citizenship, which is foundational to our Constitution, our democracy, and since the Civil War, really foundational to what we've been trying to make this country into in terms of our beliefs in what it ought to be and who ought to feel like they belong. We and other organizations have also filed lawsuits on the Trump administration's attempt to close our borders and shut down any access to asylum for people coming here seeking safety. And we've also challenged the Trump administration's attempts to end something called CBP-1, which it was a way for people to come to the border and in an orderly way be able to seek entry and make their case for asylum. What we have now still is a lot of executive orders that set in motion things that haven't quite happened yet. We are concerned that the Trump administration is going to be essentially putting people who have a quasi-legal status into jeopardy, making them far more vulnerable to deportation. And this includes hundreds of thousands of people with something called temporary protected status, also thousands of people who benefit from humanitarian parole. It's a pathway that has long existed in this nation. It's been used by presidents of both parties to ensure that people who are otherwise facing urgent humanitarian crises and disasters have a way to be in the United States and seek safety here. And finally, we're also very much concerned about the Trump administration's invocation of an invasion rhetoric and actual emergency authorities to use the military domestically on our soil. We've already seen the Trump administration tap the Texas National Guard and give them new authorities to conduct immigration arrests in the state of Texas. And we are certainly concerned with their attempts to use the military more broadly, to close the borders, using military bases for detention, using military planes, which is extremely expensive and really raises questions about the militarized approach to immigration enforcement. So what does it look like in our communities? This, I think, is what's really important to focus in on for today's webinar. We are concerned that the Trump administration has set in motion a drastic ramp up of immigration enforcement on our streets. Now, street arrests are something that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, has always had the authority to do, and they always have done. But under the Biden administration, we saw a lot more limits put on their ability to do that kind of street enforcement. partly in recognition that street enforcement is highly disruptive to our communities. When people are afraid that ICE and other law enforcement are conducting arrests on their street, they may be afraid to talk to law enforcement altogether. The Biden administration recognized that law enforcement trust requires communities to feel that they can talk to law enforcement, not have to run in the other direction. It requires that prosecutors are able to talk to people in immigrant communities, and that we're all much safer when we know that we can trust law enforcement and go to them to seek police protection and to seek access to government services. But unfortunately, what we're seeing now with the Trump administration is an attempt to intimidate. Their goal, ultimately, I should say, is to be able to deport 20 million people. 20 million people is the number that President Trump has talked about. That's a larger figure than most people have even used when talking about the number of undocumented people in the country. He wants 20 million people deported, and in order to get there, he actually wants many of them, if not most, to self-deport. So the street arrests that we're talking about, the raids in places like in New Jersey at a fish market, or the potential raids on schools or our places of worship, that is all calculated to make people so afraid to take part in daily life in this country, in our communities, that people feel like they need to leave, that they can't have their kids enrolled in school, that they can't show up to work without having to live in fear that they will not see their families again, that they'll be torn away. So that's what's at stake when we talk about immigration raids and arrests. In terms of the policy, in terms of what's happened, we saw the Trump administration revoke the sensitive locations, also the protected areas guidance that the Biden administration had put in that would have limited ICE from doing immigration enforcement near places like hospitals, disaster assistance sites, of course, places of worship, and our schools. The Trump administration also made clear that it would do collateral arrests. These are arrests of people who aren't actually the targets of the raid, but who happen to be at that place and, in a sense, in the wrong place at the wrong time. So while the Trump administration talks about wanting to go after criminals, the reality is that many of the people that they are picking up do not have criminal convictions. They may not even have criminal charges. They are the collateral arrests, the people who were there, who were arrested because they were there. The Trump administration has also tried to expand how and who is involved in immigration enforcement. So they are tapping the FBI and DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency agents, to help conduct immigration raids. And this is, of course, concerning because we have to wonder what are the serious crimes and investigations that these law enforcement agents are being taken off of so that they can show up at fish markets and question people who are working there and going about their daily lives. It's also concerning because many of the law enforcement agents who are being tapped to do immigration work are not trained in immigration law, which is a complicated area. And as we start to see more state and local law enforcement brought in to immigration enforcement operations, we have to be really concerned about their compliance with our nation's civil rights laws and their ability to recognize when people do have lawful status or a claim to be able to stay in the country. I want to just say one last thing, which is why are we concerned about immigration raids? And maybe that's obvious to a lot of you who are watching this right now. You're tuned in because you are concerned about raids. But I think as we watch the news and we hear and see the Trump administration tout the number of people who they are arresting, who have criminal convictions, who are related to gangs or drugs, we have to remember who's really harmed by the large-scale immigration enforcement that the Trump administration is doing. The Biden administration and previous administrations always prioritized people who posed public safety threats. The difference here with the Trump administration is that while they talk about public safety threats, they are going after far more people. Remember, the Trump administration wants to deport as many people as possible. So while they talk about drugs and crime, they're going after our loved ones and our neighbors. When they talk about cutting costs and making the price of eggs lower, they're also ramping up costs, setting up costly facilities like the one at Guantanamo Bay, which will house tens of thousands of immigrants using military planes instead of regular charter flights that cost far, far more. And we have to think about the kids who are left behind. And I know so many of us are thinking about that every day when we send our kids to school. If you're an educator, you're thinking about what you're going to do to protect the kids in your classrooms. So much of the Trump agenda is about harming kids, and depriving them of caregivers, of their breadwinners, of their families. And of course, we are all concerned about racial profiling happening in our community. The reality is that in the raids that we've seen so far, ICE has questioned people because of the language they speak, because of the color of their skin, not because of the safety threat, the public safety threat they pose, or any kind of particularized suspicion. And that raises concerns about racial profiling, which is unconstitutional and is not something that we should have to tolerate as essentially official government policy. And so with that, I'll end. I'm happy to answer questions about these immigration actions, but there's so much more to talk about, so I'll toss it back to the Congressman.
Noreen, thank you very much. And I just want to add one thing in terms of the who's being targeted. As you said, they're just sweeping in a very broad group of people, and we have many reports of U.S. citizens getting swept up in some of these raids and taken into custody. Okay, next we will go to Abel Nunez.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here, Congressman. I'll share a little bit about what rights do people have if they are in the presence of ICE. And so I'm gonna share my screen real fast. And so we have basic rights in this country. So the rights that we have as before Trump came in and what we have now are still the same. So I want to make sure that people understand that, and that we are not afraid, and we should be able to know how to exercise those rights. So I'm now going to share. So these are basically 6 rights that we have, everyone in this country. And the one right that we need to remember is that we have the right to refuse consent to searches in our homes, in our cars, and in our person. And so remembering that when that ICE will ask you to enter your home, you need to know that they can only enter your home with a search warrant issued by a court, signed by a judge for a specific address. And so we need to kind of know that. And if they don't have that, that you don't have to let any law enforcement in there. This right gets lessened when you become more public. So if you're in your car, you still have the right to refuse them to search your car, and you can exercise those rights. And you can also refuse them to search your person if you are on the street. Now, the biggest right and the most important right is the right to remain silent, and exercising that right is critical. I would say that it's the right to not incriminate yourself. Part of what ICE needs to do is to have some evidence that you are not here in this country with proper documentation or with permission. So they will ask you several things. And if you exercise that right, that is what can save you from being put in deportation proceedings. But be mindful that if you are interacting with ICE officers, there's a really high likelihood, even if you're exercising this rights, that you will be detained and you will be taken to a detention center. But if you hold to that, your ability to remain silent and not sharing information will allow any legal provider to provide a greater defense for you. And so we must be aware of that. And the way you exercise that right is by saying that you're refusing to answer, that you won't answer any questions, and that you're exercising your right to remain silent. So it's not just about being silent. A lot of organizations have red cards, is what we're calling them. It is, you can hand that to an officer if you feel nervous. You have to remember that interacting with law enforcement can be very stressful, and people are going to be nervous. And so you have to rely on kind of muscle memory to make sure that you're repeating this and you're repeating it consistently. The other one, if you are in detention and if you are being put in the process of deportation, you have the right to call your consulate. But be mindful that this is something that you shouldn't ask at the beginning of any interaction, because that in and of itself lets them know that you are not an American citizen, and that gives them more probable cause to actually even more questions about that can heighten your probability of being detained. And so, but you do have a right to call your consulate if you're going to be deported, to make sure that you can prepare for your transition back to your country of origin. you have the right to speak to an attorney or legal counsel. So you must ask for that. Now, in immigration, which is a civil procedure, you do not have, the state does not pay for it, but you do have a right to have one. So you should exercise that right. I said, I need to call my legal counsel, my attorney. They should give you access to that. The other thing within the context of detention, ICE is known to put a lot of papers in front of you to tell you to sign them. And if you sign them, you will be quickly released. That is, it doesn't create any harm. And this is, you have to remember, ICE officers are not working for your best interest. They are working to ensure that they meet their mission and deport you. So you should never sign any document that, one, you don't understand, or that puts you in greater jeopardy. You should have your legal counsel check it out before you do that, or your attorney, but do not sign everything. And then finally, one of your final rights is the right to receive a copy of your file, whatever they have on you, and you should request at all times, because that can be used for your defense down the road. I want to be mindful that these are the rights that you have, but we have to be sure of how we exercise them, when we exercise them. So a couple of things I want to say, and actually the previous presenter mentioned it. There are people that are in different vulnerable situations, people that have orders of deportation, and people that have been here less than 2 years will be put in expedited removal. That means that people will have to leave the country without any court process. So you have to be mindful. Also, remain calm at all times with officers. Do not try to block them physically, because that can be perceived as an attack on an officer, and you can actually be charged with additional crimes. Also, do not run from ICE officers. The moment you run, that gives them probable cause to chase you. And if you're running and you enter a school, a church, any of the sensitive areas, or even your home, they actually do have the authority to follow you in, including knocking down doors. So just because you made it into your house and you lock the door does not mean that they won't come in, because at that point they're in hot pursuit. And so you must remember to always remain calm. Remember that you have the right to remain silent and not incriminate yourself, and then ask for legal counsel without signing anything. The last thing that I would put here for anyone to check is our QR codes. Part of what we're saying for folks is that they need to be prepared. The best defense that you have in an interaction with ICE is to prepare your emergency plan for those that have that. That includes knowing your unique immigration situation, because depending of what can impact you, you have either a stronger defense or a weaker defense. So you must know that. You also should plan about what to do for children, for family, for assets before you get arrested. Once you get arrested, your phone is taken away, and you have very little ability to call someone. So I would say this, the final piece of advice that I would give to anybody as they're interacting with ICE: if you do get detained, you must memorize the phone number of someone that can implement the emergency plan. You will not have your phone, and unfortunately nowadays we don't remember phone numbers, and they will take your phone away. So remember that phone number and make sure that that's the number that you call if you find yourself in detention. I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Abel. And we turn now to Elba Garcia from MCPS.
Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, Congressman Raskin and other community leaders on the call. I am the Senior Community Advisor for Montgomery County Public Schools. Thank you for having me today. We are happy to share resources that we have been providing to our families, which outline key information and supports that are available to our school community. First of all, I want to make sure that you guys know that our superintendent has shared widely our MCPS stance. Our schools are and will always remain safe places where every child, regardless of their immigration status, is welcomed, valued, affirmed, validated, respected, and loved. We've made this information readily available on our website and have communicated directly with staff. And more importantly, we've also ensured accessibility for our families through multilingual outreach via email, text, through our school staff, their newsletters, and multiple community partners. I want to share on the chat, and maybe Erica can do that later, our website, so you can also see the multiple information that we have there on varied languages. Included in the website are some informational flyers for our families, again, in multiple languages. These short documents have key facts, answer some frequently asked questions that we've heard through our engagement, share Know Your Rights cards, and also share and provide a list of community organizations that can support our affected families. To remind everybody on the call, we are a school system. All children have a right to a public education. Under federal law, all children, regardless of their citizenship or residency status, are entitled to a K-12 education. Also, MCPS does not collect or share information concerning the immigration status of enrolled students. In addition, schools are prohibited without parental consent from providing any information from a student's file to federal immigration agents unless they have a subpoena, a properly issued subpoena. And like Abel shared, immigrant families have rights, and they should know what their rights are. In addition, on our site, we responded to some frequently asked questions, and I'll give you some examples. How does MCPS handle immigration enforcement should they visit schools? MCPS has clear procedures in place to ensure student safety and how we respond appropriately if immigration officials visit a school. These procedures were prioritized based on legal compliance, our student well-being, and ensuring that we have clear communications with our families. If an immigration official comes to a school, our staff has been instructed to verify the visitor's identity and request to see official documentation, immediately notify our MCPS legal counsel so that they can verify and provide guidance, contact any impacted student family in their preferred language, and follow security protocols to ensure the safety of our students and our staff. Another question that we get, can schools prevent immigration officials from carrying out their duties? While MCPS cannot obstruct state or federal law enforcement, officers carrying out a lawful order, we can take every measure to maintain a safe and stable learning environment for students and staff. I also want to share three big takeaways for our families, our constituents. We at MCPS will do anything within our legal rights to protect and support our students and families. Our schools are safe places, and our staff have been informed on how to support families and manage school immigration enforcement if they come to school. And although we have communicated with our families in many ways via web, text, phone, in our website, through our newsletters in multiple languages, we rely heavily on our partners in our county and our community-based organizations like Abel, CARECEN, and some of the other ones to support our families affected navigating these difficult times. I am happy to share my screen and share a little bit of the website if possible. Let me see if I can do this so that you can see all of the resources that we have.
Great. Oh, but thank you. If you could just try to wrap it up in a minute or so.
Okay, so then don't worry. We will make sure that we share our website and our resources so that they could be posted.
Terrific.
And I want to thank you, Congressman Raskin, for your partnership and advocacy on this matter.
You bet. Thank you for a terrific presentation. It's very reassuring. And finally, to close this out is Luisa Fernanda Cardona. If you're still there, Luisa.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. Congressman Raskin, as a formerly undocumented immigrant myself and resident of the 8th District, I am so honored to have you as an advocate for our community. I will share with you guys very quickly some resources that the county has put together on where you can find important information and connect to things that community members might need. A lot of our information is actually based out of the community engagement cluster. It includes my office, the regional centers, but also the Office of Community Partnerships and the Commission for Women. So this team has been created to serve you, the community, to ensure that we are effectively communicating and providing a voice in local decisions. One of the main resources I wanted to highlight was the Gilchrist Immigrant Resource Center and that website, where you can find, honestly, a lot of the information that Elba covered, as well as links to CARECEN and some of the information that Abel covered. We have immigration services links, citizenship links, know your rights links, as well as family preparedness and how to contact immigrant agencies, right, if something were to happen. I did want to note as we're going through this that while the county has vetted these sources, it is not an endorsement. It is more a connection. We're connecting communities to all of the resources that they can find. To quickly cover, if you are looking for an attorney, you are looking for a nonprofit, you're looking to connect someone to a nonprofit, you can find that on the Gil Press page. You can also find Know Your Rights information, those red cards that Abel mentioned. You can find them through this page. You can locate them. You can print them out at home. You can also find organizations where you can locate that information. Again, you can also contact immigrant agencies, right? Someone might have been detained, you want to locate them. These are specific links to verified government agency resources. It's very important to us that our residents and community members go to credible sources for information. To go to the Gilchrist page, we'll share the page, but also there is a hotline. It's 240-777-4940. They can answer and assist people in multiple language. They can assist in French, in Spanish, and Amharic. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I also wanted to know, para nuestras personas que hablen español, Montgomery County has a Montgomery County en Español page. On that page, we post various county resources in Spanish, but it is also a way for the community to reach out to us, to ask us questions. If they have anything that they want to ask us about, they can reach out to us directly. We're also a people-centered agency. Call us, right? You can call any of the regional directors, including myself. That is our cell phone numbers. If you have questions, if you really don't understand, don't know how to locate something, or just want additional information. I also wanted to share the contact information for our community liaisons. The county has dedicated community liaisons for the Latino community, for the Asian community, for the faith community. So maybe you just want to connect to a specific group, to specific resources that are very relevant to your community. You can reach out to our community liaisons. And that's the end of my presentation here today, but I sincerely hope that anyone listening to this webinar knows that they can call us and reach out to us anytime. Thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. I really am gratified and reassured by everybody's presentations in a time of a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty. You guys have put all of the essential facts out there and certainly opened up some pathways for people to learn more about specific questions and issues that may be on their mind. I thank you all for everything you're doing every day. Hang tough, everybody, and we will be in touch. All best.